Thank you for joining the podcast. Today, we are talking about educational development in software testing. We have a unique perspective here because we're viewing it through the lens of an international initiative, but I believe that it has insights that we can apply globally in both developed countries and really throughout the world. I'm pleased to have three guests today. We have Michael Pucci, Adele Pucci, and Randall Rice, who are three of the individuals who are part of the overall team that spearheaded this initiative. And what I'd like to do is start by having Michael give us an overview of the initiative, a brief overview, and a little bit of his background, which I think lends itself well to understanding the initiative itself. So, Michael, if you could.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Really excited to talk about this initiative. It's an initiative that's called We Code, and it was in partnership with GIZ, which is a government-funded organization, and is really looking at trying to start a tech services industry from scratch in Rwanda. And that's not a small feat, and we were pulled in as implementing partners. Maraho Technology is my company, and I'm the Director of Education Innovation for Maraho Technology. And really, our goal was to design an educational pipeline to develop these capacities and competencies, chiefly in women, because it's a women-only program, to enable them to serve on projects and focused on the niche of software testing and tech services. And this means global projects coming into Rwanda and really kind of making Rwanda a destination for this kind of niche tech services. That's a development project in the sense that it's multi-stakeholder. It's the public sector, as well as education, as well as the private sector, kind of working together to create this ecosystem from scratch. So that's kind of a bit of an overview of what's behind the project. And my background is in educational capacity building. Before I was in Rwanda, we started engaging in Rwanda in 2006 on various educational capacity building projects. I was based in Singapore, and similarly worked in Southeast Asia on projects that help developing contexts build capacities and skill sets for the future of work.
Oh, that's great. That's a great introduction, and this should be an interesting conversation. Adele, can you give us a brief overview of your role in this so we understand your perspective as you give us some insights?
Yeah, thanks for this opportunity to talk about what we did. The women are adult learners. A lot of them had a background in IT. Some had bachelor's degree. We had a big diversity of English ability and a wide background of ages and educational experiences. So my role was a facilitator, a trainer, a coach, and just to use all of the educational background and experience I have to make the most of the learning that we had and to make sure they were understanding the content. And we used different tools such as having the women be in teams, for example, as a method to just focus on teamwork for the women to enhance their learning. We used a lot of different technology, online platforms, and tests and feedback. And it was just exciting to be in this context with new content. We don't know anything about software testing, but being educators is really exciting to be able to use our educational tools and experience and background to really make the most of their learning opportunity.
Yeah, I love the bigger picture environment and educational, perspective that you have and you can bring to this. So that is very interesting. So I've had the pleasure of speaking with Randall Rice before, and he is the software testing expert that was brought in to provide specific education and assistance with kind of crossing a goal of certification. So, Randy, can you give us a brief overview of your role in this?
Sure. So my role was to bring the expertise in certification training to bear, ISTQB certification training, and even more so kind of with the ASTQB flavor and anticipation of them taking the ASTQB exam for the certification. And there's a lot of nuance around certification and certification training, especially in the ISTQB world and especially with the new syllabus that's out. So my role there was to come in as one of a team of several different international trainers that each of us have our own areas of expertise to train not only in the knowledge perspective of the certification, but also to guide in the performance of the exercises and the practical nature so that they would have the proficiency distinction that ASTQB offers. So there's a lot of questions, as you go into the exercises and also going through the sample exams. And so I was there to kind of support that. And we also do something a little bit unique in that they prepare for the exam for another week after I leave. So supporting them with questions or answers to questions after all that happens is another thing that I was doing.
That's great. And so it's very clear that this was not some rote memorization exercise, if you will, but really between Adeles' efforts and your efforts and the overall initiative, they're really developing a broader set of skills and really much more in depth than I think people might think if they were just simply being thrown some information that they could try and repeat back. So
right.
So Michael, describe the educational process that's required through this. As Adele described, there was a great diversity in experience, education, knowledge, age, even English proficiency. And from what I understand, these were conducted in English. So there's some challenges there. I suspect you've run into these before through your other experiences, but tell me, where do you start? Obviously, based on what's been described, you didn't just throw them into some class, give them some testing terms, and ask them to take an exam to prove that they had memorized those. What is the process that you use in this kind of situation?
So basically we're taking a competency-based approach, and this is kind of the flavor of the month these days to talk about competency-based education. It's come back around. Back in the 70s in the U.S., we kind of met a fork in the road in higher education, and I think we went the wrong way on time-based approaches to education. We're still all wed to the Carnegie unit in higher education. And as a way of measuring how you educate, competency-based is basically, let's proceed based on a level of mastery, and let's pursue learning based on proficiency rather than just a number of hours with their bum in a seat. And so this means that there's a lot of things that are related to competency-based learning that are self-paced or at a pace that's kind of self or team regulated. And then the other gold in the equation of Bloom, who did a lot of research back in the 80s on really the best performance of how we learn best, was that individual tutoring is the best, provides the best outcome. So you combine those two things, sort of mastery-based or competency-based learning at their own pace, and you have individual tutoring, and if you can combine those two things, you have this incredible performance of learning. And that's true. That's kind of true across the board in terms of different competencies. People learn better when they're coached, and people learn better when they learn at their own pace. But it's not an affordable model to scale in higher education in the United States, so we didn't go that direction. But now that industry, and in particular tech industry, has fallen in love with competency-based education, it's become viable in a new way. And so that's a little bit of background to kind of bring us up pedagogically to our approach. But our first step is really to go ask the industry. So what are the competencies that make for a good tester? And just asking the industry experts again and again, what are the set of competencies that are required, and then really developing a foundational coursework around that, which is 4 weeks of intensive. They barely get any tools of testing in those first 4 weeks because we're just trying to develop the mindset. And these competencies have to do with ways of thinking. So it's kind of roughly heads, hand, and heart. In their head, their English is an important competency, but so is their logic, attention to detail, mathematical functions, logic, critical thinking, and coding. So, in this one, we obviously didn't get sucked into the big debate internally about whether or not software testers should also learn how to program. We just listened and heard, yeah, actually it's a real value. And so a lot of our teams were really progressing a lot in HTML and CSS coding and Python. So they're learning these kind of really intense cognitive capacities or competencies, but they're also learning, ways of working. And, one of those is really about teamwork and creating an environment of cooperation and synergy, which really results in a kind of, in a way, it complements the critical thinking that's required of good testers. If you have a collaborative environment where, you're not afraid to fail, you're not critiqued for failure, you're not in an individual competitive environment, against your colleagues, you're in this place where learning is like amplified. In addition to that, you would add process and organization, project management, but probably one of the most fundamental hand-based kind of competencies is learning how to learn. It's not something that we're kind of born with, that we definitely want to learn from ground zero, but to have the capacities to amplify our own learning, to try, to question, to correct, to really grow in our capacity that way is unique, and to be given an environment in which it's like conducive, it's a greenhouse for learning, is really what we hit on in terms of the key ingredients required for learning for an environment which this kind of engagement is, and brand new capacities are being taken on board. Is if you teach them how to learn first, then anything you throw at them, they can take and add to their toolbox. I think in the third category, the heart, you're looking at really fundamental things about, what are the impediments to learning and how do we get rid of those? Our attitudes, our habits, and how can we create a growth mindset that, in a way kind of hacks our own motivational framework, gets us up out of bed in the mornings and pushes us on to challenge ourselves into things that are not easy and out of our comfort zone. And then finally, how do you take care of things? If software testers of the future don't have this care, this responsibility and ownership over the software products that we're making, then they're kind of useless at a fundamental level. If that isn't internalized, where when no one is watching, and they're the only voice and often the only break on something, they have to care about it when no one's looking. And so we were selecting for these competencies, and they really were across the spectrum, as Adele was saying. Like, they don't have a correlation with whether or not the person is 18 and just graduated from high school or has a master's degree. They both could have these competencies in spades, except for their application of these competencies might be in other things, other areas of life. And so we're kind of taking the approach of identifying them, fanning them into flames, and then providing the tools relevant to software testing to really make sure that transfer of learning into the industry discipline of software testing is applied correctly. So, I mean, that's a whole lot of pedagogy in one bite size, but that gives a pretty good overview of kind of our philosophy of education and approaching this problem.
No, that's great. And that gives a nice overview, as well as it describes some of the challenges. And I wanted to ask Adele, kind of in terms of a support role with the great diversity, again, in language and age and experience and education and whatnot. How much does it become this one-on-one role in which you need to go in there and provide that support, or how much is really can be handled through the larger teams that are in place and maybe that team support?
Yeah, it was really great to see how the teams developed over the course of the 8 weeks. And knowing that a whole team approach is really important in software development and quality assurance, we came away really believing in the strength of these women to work together and to take an international test like they did for international certification. We think that the value of their teamwork and collaboratively studying together really helped them with this huge achievement. So to see them studying together late into the night, helping some that didn't understand one concept, somebody on the team would understand it and share it to the others, and then somebody else might understand something in a different way, and the support that they gave, professionally and just as a community. I think that is that's a key part of having this learner-centered education and having people take ownership, because there's no way that Michael and I and Randy could have coached all of the women. So in a way, they took that responsibility to coach each other in pairs, in teams. Each team also has a facilitator, a head facilitator, and those women had taken the training in the first cohort, which was run about 5 months previously. So they had gone through this content before, and they're Rwandan women, so they're in the best position to really coach these women. So I think having a lot of facilitators to be able to encourage the women to create a safe learning environment is really key. And that's key going forward for them being able to support each other as they learn new things and adapt to new challenges and achievements. They have that support that they need professionally. That there's a group of women professionally that are already tight together for the development of a whole new testing industry in Rwanda, and that's just really amazing to see. And they did that themselves.
I really like that concept. So, and I'm jumping the gun a little bit here, so we'll backpedal a little bit to talk about whether the program was successful. But is in terms of these teams, were they the same groups or pairs or groups with mentors during the course of the 4 weeks, and I guess looking forward, do they stay in those same teams, or is this really just developing the ability to be in any team going forward?
They stay in the same team for 8 weeks. So if they pass through the basic training, then they go on to the advanced training. The first week of which is Randy's training in ISTQB certified. So I think that the key function of that is really to develop their capacity to work in teams, to work collaboratively. But in a lot of ways, I think the context has a lot to do with the uniqueness of their teams too. We say teams, but we don't even kind of know what the definition of the word is compared to a Rwandan team. The degree of collaboration is already there in the DNA of the culture, and certainly in teams of women. I mean, obviously the research is out to show that if you want high performing have more women on them. And that's definitely been a factor for us as we kind of removed some of the stigma, the cultural stigma, the industry stigma around them just being, being software testers, being technicians, being engineers, which still, in their world is an unusual thing, and them really kind of taking the pride of creating a place where they don't just collaborate, they drag each other to new levels. They're pushing and they're pulling, they're encouraging. They start every day with their stand-ups, just agile style. But they're the funniest, agile scrums you've ever seen. They, some of them end up in prayer. Some of them are, how are you doing emotionally? What can we do for your family issue? So it's a degree of more than collaboration. It's support. And in a way, we're learning more about teamwork and how to really amplify that capacity and competency from them. So we knew it was important, but actually they're bringing something, I think, even kind of new to the industry, a degree of collaboration and that's unusual in a kind of highly individualized West. So I think that's
very interesting. And I think that's one of the interesting lessons that as we look to, learn the lessons coming out of this, that's maybe something that we can apply more globally, but understanding that the culture of Rwanda itself lends itself to that probably. But that's very interesting. So let me ask kind of this bottom line question. We're not at the end yet, but the big question is, did it work? Did they achieve at least a basic level of proficiency? We can talk about what ongoing education will be needed. I'm really interested to learn about, that goal of crossing the line with certification, and we can talk about that, in a little more detail as well. But were they able to reach that level of proficiency? Did the model work? And if so, what were the big lessons in just reaching that basic proficiency?
Rand, you want to take that one first?
Sure. I'm going to kind of go back to the first cohort for just a second. I was really concerned on day 4. And by the way, one thing that we failed to mention to this point is kind of the context of what this training looks like. So there's 50 women in a class. By U.S. standards, especially U.S. corporate standards, people would be saying, no way. It's usually 10 to 15 people in a class. And there's no books. Okay, they're taking notes in the room. And so it looks a lot different than it does over here in this scale and how the materials are and all that. But I was a little bit concerned at the point of Thursday because I hadn't seen them go through the entire process of testing yet. And so come Friday afternoon, right after lunch, we really worked on going from the whole beginning to end of the testing process. And I was overjoyed when every team testing an actual application was able to go from the planning all the way through the execution to the evaluation, and then do it on another version of the same application. Then we repeated, that was kind of a lesson learned for me. So then in the second cohort, the one that we most recently did, we did the same thing. And I was a little bit short on time when we got to Friday, but we were able to do a single pass through on Friday. And this time we were able to use Google Docs and put them up on the projector. And I was able to critique the way that they had written their cases and scripts. And so we went a little bit deeper actually in that second cohort. But once again, they were able to demonstrate to me that they were able to find defects in software, report them. And, when you get to that level, then you know that you've actually done your job as an instructor and that they have done their job as the learners to be able to do that. And as we've been saying, it's not just that they can recite from rote memory the definition of a term. It's that they can say, oh, that's a boundary test, or, oh, that's a decision table kind of test. And then actually do that test and actually see, oh, hey, there's a defect. It didn't perform right when it crossed that boundary. So those are the really big wins for me when I can see people do that. And so from that standpoint, yeah, I'd say, yeah, it was fantastic. It worked, and their motivation was extremely high. That was really what charges me. I mean, not a single person appeared to be disinterested in those 50. And it's just a level of interest and motivation that I normally just don't see in classes.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So beyond that, that actually sounds really promising. So it sounds like, yes, basic level of proficiency has been achieved. So, and given the fact that you're seeing that, you're reviewing those, they've put in, they're going to put in a total of 8 weeks. And it's interesting that Michael brought this up at the beginning, because you could argue, hey, they've gone through their 8 weeks. They've participated well in class. Let's give them, participation points and a certificate of completion of the course, and we're good to go. But this initiative went a step further by using an international standard for software testing knowledge, and depending on the level and the type of certification, really software testing advanced skills and whatnot. Why was that important in this case? Why not just say, hey, you did a great job in the class, and here's your certificate of completion? What's the value of bringing in the certification exam?
I think it's pretty obvious to kind of get to a legitimacy level in the industry. We're trying to, in a competency-based model, you want to be measuring proficiency, not just participation, right? So, and you need to look to an industry standard to say what that is, to see, okay, and obviously with the ASTQB in particular, with the proficiency distinction offered as part of it, they're amplifying that here is a way to assess people's capacity to do this stuff, to do these activities. And I think, to kind of tie that back to the other question of just success, there's 41 women in Rwanda now that are ISCQB certified. Before there were 0, and I think that's a huge win with 2 cohorts of 50 to have 41 women pass that foundational level and really kind of get their international kind of recognition of their proficiency. In addition to that, obviously our own in-house tools of measuring their competencies, both self-assessment, assessment by their facilitators, by us, and their supervisors, and just kind of getting a sense of where they are, what they would be able to handle in terms of projects, but also like getting them exercise as much as possible. Even in the course of a day, in the morning, we're doing heavy content in a big group, and then breaking out into our teams, mostly for the rest of the afternoons, to work on activity-based kind of learning, and then also down into pairs and solo work, because you really want to kind of push that learning deeper and deeper into their hands, so that they can feel confident. But anything, I mean, the week before Randy came is a good example of a moment, kind of just to give you a little flavor. Here's one of our trainers who was from the first cohort standing up and teaching how to program a piece of automation script in Python and PyCharm for Selenium IDE, and she's teaching it to the group in Kinyarwanda, in their local language. So you're like, they're getting things and digesting and in a way appropriating and internalizing them in a rate that really shocked us. So in terms of their proficiency, on a number of our factors where we're measuring internally across the competencies, they're succeeding. They're ready for project work. And of course, that kind of segues into what we did after with internships and things like that. But I would look at this as, hugely successful, and probably caused some questions to how even in the West the traditional delivery of upskilling is done. I think there are some elements in here that really we all can adopt and appropriate, really, because I think we're looking at a scenario in the next phase of work where our capacity to learn has to increase. It was enough to just here get your degree, add a few bits in your on the job training, and then that's about it. But they're saying by 2030 half of your work time will be just learning the next thing. And if we don't prepare ourselves to be good and fast and collaborative learners, I think we're going to all be outpaced by technological change.
Well,
yeah.
let me jump in a second. Just so it sounds like you're saying that this model that you've developed here, and you have some experience, obviously, in Asia when you were based out of Singapore, but it sounds like the model can be used beyond Rwanda, despite the differences in culture and background and whatnot. And so, and if presuming that is the case, I'm really very interested in learning what are those lessons, maybe more specifically, that those in other countries can use both with their less experienced individuals as well as those that were well experienced and very knowledgeable, but now technology has evolved to the point where they need to become those additional consumers of knowledge.
Yeah, I think it was a success also because with not a lot of time, 8 weeks, and with not a lot of like financial resources, I think we've proven that you can take a group of people and really work on developing their growth mindset and positive attitude and kind of lifelong learning, and demonstrate that it is worth it to be able to take adult learners and give them sort of the basic kind of skills that they need to take this ownership of their learning and continue to do that. And asking the women if it was a success for both of the cohorts at the end of the 8 weeks, I think all of them, they talked about in terms of that it was life-changing, that it changed, it was a paradigm shift for them. And I don't think that has anything to do with the culture of Rwanda. I think that could be done anywhere. For a lot of us, we sort of, if we're kind of stuck in this fixed sort of idea of learning and, I'm too old to learn, or I can never get that. A lot of the women were they're living examples of like, oh, I didn't think I could do anything in coding. And after 8 weeks of, spending a lot of time focused on coding and learning a whole new area of software testing, like it was just amazing to see their progress and to see the sort of light on their faces, realizing, oh, I learned something now, like I'm a tester. And this opens up doors for them, for in an industry that really didn't take that much time and not a lot of money to do that. So this is something that easily could be done in many other areas, and really creating this safe environment for learning. It's something that for organizations, individuals in charge of kind of training employees, I think that there's just a lot of basic educational tools that we can use and look at how we're training and what is motivating people, and really empower them to take charge and be lifelong learners to, like, as Michael said, if this is kind of the way of the future and we're having to constantly learn and adapt and be flexible, how can we just make the most of the opportunities and the potential we have, and work together and support each other to, be the best at whatever industry that we're in. And we can't, that's not something you do just as a young person and then you finish college, or you finish your credentials and your testing, and that's it. You have to keep learning and keep having that positive attitude, your whole life.
Yeah. No, that's perfect. So I have a question for Randy, and then another one for Michael. So Randy, you teach. I mean, you teach classes in Europe, you teach in the U.S., you teach remotely or whatnot. What are a few things that stand out about this group that if you could transfer that, whether it be an attitude or an approach that you saw, if you could transfer that to other parts of the world, with the result being a better level of proficiency, knowledge gained, understanding, and improvement in software quality skills, what few things would you probably try to extract, put in a bottle, and carry over to other classes?
That's a really great question. You know, there's a marked difference, and I've been thinking about this quite a bit. I think a lot of it goes back to motivation. And, most of the people I train, I think, kind of take it for granted. I don't want this to come across the wrong way, but uh, honestly, I think we take a lot of things for granted in where we live in the West and in Europe, that we should get training as a part of our job and all of this. And these ladies, they didn't have that starting point, that expectation that training was something that automatically came either with the job or that should be provided. And for them, this was a big mountain for them to climb. And once they reached the peak of it, it was a great accomplishment just to complete the program. And then to get the certification was another one. And like Michael and Adele were saying, there are a lot of these ladies, they would get there early, they would stay late, and it was just an incredible amount of motivation. But the support, the team-based learning and support is just amazing, that they help each other, they coach each other. They have these set of rules that each team works by and lives by, and it's it's this safe environment, as Adele was saying, that it's okay to fail. We're in the training environment, but when we fail, we're going to fail forward and we're going to learn from it. And just that caring for each other and the motivation that they all have is probably the biggest thing. And I'll just say one other thing real quickly. I kind of get, I don't know, it gets to me sometimes when I read some of the comments out on the web about, people talking about certification as just being, yeah, I passed all the questions, it wasn't a big deal, so what? It's a 180-degree difference in attitude than what I see with the Rwandan classes and ladies there, that it's a major accomplishment, they're proud of it, and they should be. It's not something casual, okay? And they know why they're there. They're there to change their lives. They're there to learn something that's really significant for them. And I would just say just this attitude and motivation would be the biggest thing that if I could transport it, I would.
Yeah, that's really good. That's really good. Michael, I want to, so for those in the audience, I didn't mention it before, Michael has a PhD and has obviously some heavy academic credentials coming into this. If you were to talk to someone who was an academic or in the industry, but had a strong desire to understand or research something or examine something more closely, is there an area that you've discovered through maybe not even just this initiative, but overall development of these educational programs, that would merit further research on their end, if they have resources that you don't and time that you don't necessarily have? I know you've talked about some of the different models, and I wonder if there isn't something, a nugget out there that someone should really kind of dive into, because there's really some promise in that area, and it merits further exploration.
Yeah, actually, you're asking the dream question for an academic like myself. We recently wrote a proposal for a research piece to look at the relationship between cultural DNA, in a way, and gendered teams and competencies. And really, it's something that hasn't really had enough time. And recently, I got called up to go kind of represent. It was actually right in the middle of Randy's training, and represent the model to a UNESCO conference on during their mobile learning week. So there's a lot of interest in what we're doing because everybody's now trying to figure out how to redesign their entire educational system for the 21st century, really, and for this rapid acquisition of skills, this ongoing learning, etc. But the question that most puzzles me is, what's the relationship between context and these competencies, and what are the things like you've said that you can migrate, and what are the things that really are unique to place? The answer to those questions are really important because they say things about the role of specific contexts in the global economy. It would be really, I mean, if we look back in 10 years, I mean, and Randy and I both have talked about this before, but like look back and see a destination for testing emerging in a context like Rwanda, just because of who they are. It's an orderly, very methodical. I've looked in East Africa and thought, I don't think I could do this in some of the other countries neighboring, just because a different set of kind of dominant cultural values are at work. But here, it's sort of it's a perfect greenhouse for growing testers. And then this other thing about women on teams, and at the beginning of software development, there were way more women involved across the software development lifecycle, and that's diminished, probably because of a cultural shift from Silicon Valley, of the young teenage boys in their bathrobes doing coding, and that the attitude of kind of laissez-faire gambling almost that has evolved in software testing that wasn't there at the beginning, and isn't part of the engineering or design mindset. And in a way, it's kind of like, how can we get more women back into the equation? Because I think they're going to bring a real balance to global software development. They've been kind of vacuumed out of it because of this domination of a venture capital dominant industry that's high risk taking and just wants unicorns, but actually that has very little to do with really, really good software that serves human purposes. And so I think there's a restoration kind of that could be a result of some really good research that answered questions about that. So what's the relationship between competencies, and how do they bundle in culture, and how do they bundle in gender and culturally gendered roles, etc. And how can industry in a way benefit from that? I have a kind of personal wish to see procurement, in the tech services totally change from a fixed asset mindset of I'm hiring one individual at X amount, and then maybe the old outsourcing model of I can buy 3 Indians for the price of 1 North American or whatever, that kind of fixed mindset or fixed asset mindset, to this new model of co-sourcing for teams, like and also things that are dynamically learning and improving. So you're not buying something that's a fixed entity or an asset of a fixed value. You're bringing into your team, you're augmenting your team with a team that keeps growing, keeps learning. I think it's kind of a game changer, and something that we could get excited about in terms of the future of technology development, instead of just trying to chase or fight for talent on a global level. So if there was some really good research at that scale, I think it would open doors. It would to the industry looking at procurement of talent in the tech industry in a totally different way. Right now, we're just like a one-off model. It's a nice pilot, and we're gaining momentum, and people will start to learn about Rwanda and think about it in these terms. But if it was backed up by some serious scale research, I think it could have a bigger impact.
Yeah, that's great perspective. Great question and great focus there. So I want to end with a final question, and I guess anyone can jump in on this. But in terms of, and Michael, you might have the best perspective on this, but so the world of grant making, the world of being a foundation and philanthropy is often a you come to me and tell me what you need, and which is a great model because you have specific ideas and needs and whatnot. But let's pretend that there is someone in the audience who is a philanthropist who is someone who takes initiative to go after those things and kind of create the program based on a vision that they have. If someone were a philanthropist who wanted to make a difference based on what you've learned and what you're doing, let's say I've got $1 million and I want to donate it somewhere. Where would I put that money? Where would I make the most difference? Where would I get the biggest bang for the buck in something that's truly important to software quality given this context?
I've got some crazy ideas, but I always know how to spend $1 million. Yeah, to me, your question is very relevant because, Marajo Technology got its jump start off of grants. And in a lot of ways, you want to take advantage of the pump priming of money that's aimed at social impact aspects of this. But for us, the real value in this entire model is the sustainability of an industry-driven development. So with that $1 million, someone should be focusing on how do you develop and bring in that industry so that both sides of this equation are working. So right now, if someone said, I'll give you $1 million in a training budget, or I'll give you, $250,000 in project money, I'll take the project money. Because, and in fact, just give us your project, please. Give us real problems to work on, whether you're an NGO, whether you're an academic institution, whether you're industry. Give us the projects, because that's actually going to be the long-term sustainable growth of that industry. So the more that can be kind of developed in a way, lockstep, left, right, between the industry side contributing in the form of actual procurement, the better this works. So and we kind of get stuck in this, even when we're talking to industry. We talk to SAP, but they want to talk to us through their corporate social responsibility side, because this has a real social impact feel, but we want to talk to the guys who are procuring talent. That's actually what is most interesting. So I think that if someone wanted to invest their grants, then they need to be thinking about both sides of the equation. The industry side has to also kind of go through a transformation, to be thinking about procurement of talent in a new way, to try and take some risks on these new models, team-based approaches, co-sourcing, etc. And yeah, I think that's better spent, because that's going to return and grow into a proper ecosystem that could not only just affect a place like Rwanda, but actually have a global impact on the industry.
Hey, Dave.
Yeah.
One thing I'd like to kind of chime in on with Michael's comments, that really for the training to have any kind of lasting effect or impact in Rwanda or on these ladies' lives, as Michael is saying, they're going to have meaningful projects and work. And so that is a major goal, wherever that might happen, whether it be in the US or Europe or whatever. And the idea of, Michael's mentioned a term a few times called co-sourcing, and basically it's the idea that these teams come alongside teams in a company and using a bridge person to make the communication connection and all that. But to kind of fill a lot of the gaps and disappointments from traditional outsourcing. And there's been many situations where people have tried outsourcing and it just didn't work for them because it was too much of a handoff approach. And the team-based co-sourcing is like much more touch, much more communication, and you almost feel like these people are a direct extension of your team. And that's one of the big initiatives I'm working on as well, is to get this model out into the awareness of people. So it's totally different, though, than outsourcing. And I just kind of wanted to put that little explainer in there when he says co-sourcing. Really, that's what we're talking about.
No, that's helpful. That's helpful. And Michael, great answer there as well. And this is a great point, I think, to kind of conclude the discussion. It's been very helpful, very enlightening. As much as I knew about this from previous discussions with Randy, I feel like I've learned so much more and have an even greater appreciation for the implications for software quality, both specific to this as well as on a broader base, as to what it's going to take globally to go forward and continue to improve our capacities and our proficiencies in these areas. So I want to thank Adele and Michael and Randy for your time today, and really look forward to touching base at some time in the future to kind of see where all this continued to evolve to, because I suspect that this is just the beginning of the story and certainly not the end. So thank you all for taking time today.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dave.